need to pass both components, writing and reading, in order to receive a satisfactory or passing score. In some years, not all unfortunately, but in some years, the EQAO has allowed test takers to fill in questionnaires on their background information. But there's a minimal amount in the EQAO questionnaires that have been developed so far on literacy background. But there is some demographic background and some information on literacy activities. And so my colleagues and I have used this information from the questionnaire to unpack information about the test itself. Very, very helpful in understanding what the test is doing. We have identified what is most difficult for an L2 learner here. And we have identified what best discriminates or separates through discriminant analysis. We've identified grouping variables, which types of tasks and items actually separate, most clearly identify the performance of L2 learners on the test from L1 learners. Kind of interesting: narrative, indirect understanding, vocabulary, not surprising, and news reports. We did find some difference in terms of difficulty and discrimination amongst test formats. But what is really interesting, and the reason I wanted to show this to you in relation to the construct of literacy, is from the literacy background questionnaires provided by the EQAO, we find that the type of literacy activity that best predicts performance on the test is illiteracy activity. In both reading and in writing, the best predictor is illiteracy, but illiteracy is not measured on the test. When we look at construct definition, we can, not surprisingly, find that L1 and L2 speakers are operationalizing or are acting on different constructs, that the construct differs across L1 and L2 speakers. The L1 speaker, coded in pink here, sees it as just something to read. All the answers are there. You just need to do it. You just need to get it done. This is based on focus group research that we did across the province of Ontario that I did with my colleague Li-Ying Cheng. 35 focus groups with L1 and L2 test takers across the province of Ontario. We met them twice, before they wrote the OSSLT, and then after they wrote the OSSLT. And we were lucky enough to have, from the EQAO, it very generously provided us with live test items to take into that second focus group session so that the test takers could look at, write, or respond to the items, and we could discuss with them what it is they were seeing, what it is they were doing, what it is they did on the test itself. And so here I have a very brief representation of sort of summaries, summary quotes that kind of represent a whole raft of responses from the test takers. Of interest, and I think of concern here, in terms of other validity theorists, one of my favorite is Lovinger and the notion of fidelity. Tests are to reflect, to be loyal to the constructs that they represent. A key fundamental cornerstone of validity is the notion of fidelity, that the behaviors and performances we elicit on the test are representative of the behaviors and performances that occur in the target domain. The L1 speakers kept telling us that they don't actually read like this, right? They read much longer things than grade 10, and they write about them, and they talk about them, and they don't just answer questions. They have to ask questions by the time they get to grade 10. And the L2 speakers, representative quotes from them were again that they don't engage in literacy practices in their classroom in this way. They reported that they use dictionaries. They have dictionaries everywhere in their rooms, and the teachers encourage them to use dictionaries, but they can't use them on the test. And they asked us, why can't we use the internet? My teacher wants me to use it when I'm doing my schoolwork. I'll do better on the test if I can do on the test what I do in my class. So we may have a condition here. I think there's evidence in the research that we've undertaken and in what we see in terms of understanding of what it means to be literate, what the curriculum defines as literacy, in terms of the mandate that was provided to the EQAO in providing a catalyst. Remember the mandate, providing a catalyst for change, for providing a gauge of quality, providing an impetus for development. I think we have a situation here where we may have a degree of construct underrepresentation that is undermining the effectiveness of the testing practice. We can find in the literature, I only went back to 2005, but it's there earlier, notions that are communicating in the literature on literacy. There is ample recognition of the nature of literacy in our current time, with the notion that traditionally the emphasis has been on the privileging of the reading word. But new forms of communication are layered, complex, involving words, icons, coding language, images, movement, sound, space, and body. And we saw all of that playing out in the activity of that 16-month-old child interacting with that phone. Dortner argues that young producers of digital culture don't become fascinated with it because of the machine. It's because they are deriving information from it. It's a way to play things out, to find things out. Uh-oh. I got too excited. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Oh, I know. There. Have to have at least one of those. It's been far too smooth this morning. The clip played. All right. Thank you. But you see, I have, oh, this is wonderful. You're wonderful. Thank you. All right. I think the quote from Thomas and the work of Thomas is really important in this way. Every new form of community, children are participating in new forms of literacy. And I would argue literacy, as is argued here, literacy is transforming before our very eyes. It has transformed, but we haven't actually captured that transformation in many of our tests. Traditional language skills, Thomas argues, are necessary but not sufficient for the interpretation and construction of everyday texts in the digital age. We know that there is washback and negative consequences from large-scale tests like the OSSLT. We have the work of Lee Gunderson in British Columbia. We have the work of David Watt and Hetty Rosink in Calgary, in Alberta. All of them reporting similar things. We would argue, my colleague and I, Li-Ying Ching, that we are undervaluing and underestimating the literacy capacity and potential of many of our students, and that we need more demographic information to inform the interpretation of test results like the OSSLT. We would argue that there needs to be a broadening of the construct of literacy on that test, which is reflective of principles that are stated in the Ontario curriculum itself. And we would, looking at some of the recent research that is coming out on the impact of the OSSLT, or the washback, I should say, using McNamara's term, of the OSSLT on individual teachers, we do see growing reports of a narrowing of the curriculum and much more teaching to the test, and much more increased and unhealthy, I think, focus on test preparation. And finally, present at this conference are many of the theorists. Here I'm largely speaking to the choir, I know that. that have argued that linguistic diversity requires policies and initiatives, including testing policies that take into account the social and linguistic realities of youth in today's complex, digital, global, and plurilingual world. Having looked at the OSSLT using our criteria for evaluation, now let us turn to the case of the second language evaluation, which is a test that translates official language policy, which is codified in law in Canada, 1969, 1988, which finds, it's reinvigorated continually. When we have the action plan for official languages in 2003, roadmap for Canada's linguistic duality initiative in 2008, billions of dollars invested in the language policy. I think at this point in our historical development as a Canadian, we need to get the message out about what bilingualism really is. What is bilingualism? Again, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but what is it? How do bilinguals behave? Well, I brought in a clip. I happen to be sitting in the Ministry of Education in the Republic of Seychelles, a lovely place to be. I was interviewing a woman who was responsible for French language education in Seychelles. Seychelles, if you don't know it, you should visit it. It's the most beautiful country. And it's trilingual. So from a linguistic perspective, it's fascinating. They're the languages that are being worked with in their school system and in the country as a whole through different initiatives. The languages are Creole, French, and English. And if you'll bear with me, with this question of what is bilingualism, let me recount for you, let me create for you a situation where I had been interviewing my colleague at the ministry. I was there for 2 months as part of a reform initiative to look at a language policy in primary and secondary. And I was interviewing her as part of that research, of the research that I was conducting, when the phone rang, as often does. And being digitally inept, I didn't want to turn anything off. And so I captured this conversation, very, very short. And it went something like this. Oui? Oui, à l'appareil? Ben, quoi? Mais si, j'avais déjà... Écoutez, madame, non. Ou besoin causer, madame Jopi. She's already organized everything. It's just fine, okay? Elle va régler le compte, oui. Okay. Okay. Sans doute. 1 o'clock, yes. Bonjour. We need to learn to relax a little more around here. Okay, that is bilingualism. That is multilingualism. That's how it behaves. That's how it works. We could have spent this entire time together just talking about this clip and why it is she says what she is, what she does, when she does, what role each one of those languages is communicating, what its purpose is in the conversation. This is the construct. This is rich, active, fluent multilingualism. And if you have a chance, as I have, to ride the elevators in Esplanade Laurier, walk up and down the corridors of the Public Service Commission, sit in on meetings at the Government of Canada, what do you find? You find active, flourishing, lovely clips like that. You find rich bilingualism, depth, right, and vitality. Okay. So now what we have to do then is look at how that construct of bilingualism, as we know it exists, how it is operationalized in the test. We have in the literature for some time viewed linguistic resources as plural, multidimensional, shifting, dynamic,